Halloween. It's one of those silly little American holidays that we've more or less wholesale adopted over here in Europe, largely for its marketing potential, and we even celebrate it in Norway, although mostly in the larger cities, as sending a bunch of people out in the middle of the night in Norway, it's not always the safest thing to do, as there is in certain parts the genuine danger they might get eaten and/or completely utterly lost, until a moose and/or troll/wolverine finds and eats them, of course. However, one of the things about Halloween that I am aware of, even with my somewhat limited knowledge, is that the idea of it initially was to have something be spooky. But as very few people are overly perturbed today by seeing a middle-aged man covered in a bedsheet pretending to be a ghost, this kind of transitioned into the idea of something shocking, something that will go like, oh, what's that? As represented, for example, by Bill Maher, deciding to go to a Halloween party dressed as Steve Irwin after his death. That was a very, very different time, as doing something like that today bears certain risks, as we will of course be seeing soon. Another way of invoking the shock factor, particularly for women, was to don any number of whore uniforms, in essence, and do that in public. It also has other benefits as well. Or you could do like the Prince of England, say, for example, and take up something that you know that the majority of people are going to find morally reprehensible, which is rather fitting considering the primary subject of today's video, of course, being this gentleman, who was arrested in Georgia, partially for assaulting a woman, allegedly, but probably more so for wearing something rather spicy in public. So, man in Nazi uniform assaulted Georgia student after he was denied entry to a bar, officials say. Now, that's not entirely correct, but we'll get to that in a second. This individual here has been covered by quite a few people, including Harry Sisson, who had perhaps one of the more interesting takes on it, showing the reason why this is such a big deal. Because after all, if the point of Halloween is to don something shocking, and the Prince of England has already done it, then surely this must be acceptable, right? Well, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, but today our politics have somewhat hardened, and you will be given a very different interpretations, as Harry Sisson here says. I just received exclusive footage of a 33-year-old loser dressed as a Nazi attacking a woman in Athens, Georgia on Thursday night after getting kicked out of a bar. So, the argument here is that this man walking down the street dressed as a National Socialist full uniform just assaulted a woman after being removed from a bar. Now, the footage shows the individual either struggling to free himself from someone on the ground or dragging them or something, it's a bit unclear, whilst he's being pushed and dragged by other individuals. The man eventually begins to leave and is then followed by 3-4 people who continue to push and attack him as they do so as well. This is then also declared as just an assault by Harry Sisson, despite the fact that he himself had earlier shared footage showing the man being pushed, being assaulted, and hit by multiple other individuals previously. Why such a uncharitable interpretation? Well, probably because they view the uniform as a declaration of intent and of political alignment as well. Now, there is a part here where the camera gets obscured for a bit, where he's in an altercation with a woman over here, which the reports say woman, so let's assume that is the case, where the camera is covered for a second. You see the individual is kind of yanked off camera before he re-emerges and then swings his beer stein at this woman's face, knocking them down. So there is definitely some sort of altercation going on here. Now, Georgia is a state where you do not have a duty to retreat, so there is absolutely a potential for a self-defense argument here. Georgia also, however, does not have any rules stating that they must offer service to anyone. They can deny service on non-discriminatory grounds. So it's also quite important whether or not he was kicked out of the bar by some random person, or whether or not he was refused entry by the actual proprietors. Right. So, let's then talk about the acceptability of the costume itself, shall we? Again, considering some of the things that the progressives have decided are acceptable and entirely wholesome and good costumes to wear for Halloween and for their protests this year, I don't know if I'm going to accept their moral grandstanding on this, particularly considering some of their moral positions on it as well. Simply saying that, oh no, you can attack anyone wearing the clothes of your opposition, because it's always self-defense. Which is probably also why Harry Sisson is only noting one assault happening here, rather than the multiple assaults that actually happened. One of the arguments launched against this is that this is an inappropriate form of dress for Halloween, which, again, considering the original idea of being shocking, one could argue that it's actually rather fitting. But the Nazis, they're rather unique, right? History's great bad guys, and even worse, this is a concentration camp uniform, or at least so I've seen it claimed. Well, not quite. We're going to have to take a little bit of a side tangent here into a history lesson, but the SS was actually several organizations under a larger branching, like umbrella form organization. The black uniforms, for which they are so very famous, were generally speaking only used before the war started, after which the Waffen-SS and most branches of the SS traded in their black uniforms for the standard Wehrmacht-style uniforms, either in grey for the general troops or in black for the Panzer troops. The people who continued to use the black uniforms were usually members of the Allgemeine, my German pronunciation has been better, SS, which was often also a lot of volunteers and occupational forces, kind of like a security force slash secret police slash police force rolled into one with a political bent to it, of course. But as for the allegation that he's a concentration camp guard, no, because the Totenkopf, which has been used as evidence for that, that was one of the SS icons. If he was a member of the Totenkopf Verbande? Again, my German has been better. He should also have a Totenkopf on his insignia right here, rather than the twin thunderbolts. And what is this? Untersturmführer, I believe, or Sturmführer? Along those lines. So the uniform is mostly correct, as far as I can see. He seems to be lacking the cufflink, perhaps, but that's about it. Looks like the kind of standard uniform you can probably order off eBay at this point. I wouldn't be surprised. But fairly well put together. Clearly the intent of this, though, is to provoke. Again, kind of the point of Halloween. So should this be acceptable then, is kind of what this all boils down to. Yes, it should. If this is acceptable, then this should be acceptable as well. And not to mention as well that, of course, the other version of National Socialism, or excuse me, International Socialism, the Communist Party, well, that's not even acceptable merely as a Halloween costume. That is acceptable as a genuine actual political identity these days. I also do not believe there are any laws against Nazi imagery in public or the federal level in the US, although I do believe there are some laws against inciting violence, in essence, which that is a law that has basically become the American equivalent of a hate speech law, where you are accused of inciting violence if you behave a certain way that might make certain demographics violent around you. For example, like showing up in this getup in a lefty neighborhood. So there's that. I do believe that currently the individual has been brought up on 3 misdemeanor charges at the moment, and then there will of course be a full-on police procedure thereafter. But by and large, yes, this is a Halloween costume. Is it acceptable? It kind of has to be. Otherwise, well, have we now decided that Halloween is not about the shock value? Not about the fright value? Perhaps it is simply all about, well, women walking out of the house looking like whores. And hey, I mean, I'm not even necessarily opposed to that either, but we do need a general set of rules, or better yet, we don't need any set of rules, as in my opinion, this is all basically a side effect of our more politically charged times, because there was absolutely a period where we were very accepting of all of this. Now, Bill Maher did receive a fair bit of backlash after this because Steve Irwin was a genuinely beloved individual as well, but we can argue taste all we want. We can argue whether or not something is in bad taste, if something is appropriate considering the circumstances, and don't get me wrong, this is definitely in bad taste, and is definitely likely to get you accosted in some way, shape, or form, particularly as he was also heading towards, I believe, a college or a university, which tend to not exactly be hotbeds of tolerance these days, so... But the point nevertheless remains. If we are supposed to accept this and this, then we do actually have to accept this as well. Preferably, neither side will be enforcing its opinions on the other, as that is the only way we can return to a time where the shock value was allowed. Are we likely to get back there, however, with individuals like Harry Sisson, who conveniently seems to again subscribe to the idea that it's self-defense when you attack somebody you don't like? It's not very likely. And I feel almost as if an element of the uproar against this comes from a largely self-imposed left-wing fear fantasy that this is what is actually going to happen. That they're actually going to see, well, it's in America, so it would be Silver Legion people marching down the street en masse as they hound up the leftists. Which, yeah, not particularly likely here. Still, it was an amusing little incident, if nothing else. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching. I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.